It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of day that makes you feel like the sky is sitting right on your shoulders. I remember because I had just come from my doctor's appointment on Main Street in Guelph, and the parking cost me $4 I hadn't planned for. Small things stick with you when you're living on a fixed income. I was 67 years old, and I was learning, slowly and painfully, that everything costs more than you expect. I stopped at the Tim Hortons on Stone Road, the one near the university. I needed to sit for a while before driving home. My knees had been giving me trouble, and the cold that particular morning had a bite to it that went straight to my joints. I ordered a medium double-double and a plain bagel and found a table near the window where I could watch the students walking by in their big puffy coats, heads down against the wind. I hadn't been sitting for more than 10 minutes when a woman approached my table. She looked to be in her mid-50s, well-dressed, wearing a charcoal wool coat and carrying a leather portfolio. She had the look of someone who worked in an office, someone who made decisions for a living. I had never seen her before in my life. She leaned down and placed an envelope on the table in front of me, a plain white envelope, sealed, with nothing written on the outside. "I'm sorry to interrupt you," she said quietly, "but I think you're going to need this before the week is out." I looked up at her. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" She shook her head, gave me a small, serious look that I couldn't quite read, and then she walked away. I half rose from my seat to call after her, but she was already out the door, and by the time I got to the window, she had disappeared around the corner of the building. I stood there with my coffee getting cold, staring at that envelope on the table. I should tell you a little about my life at that point because none of what came next would make sense without it. My husband, Kenneth, had died 2 years before. Pancreatic cancer. He went from diagnosis to gone in 4 months, which was both a mercy and a devastation depending on the hour of the day you asked me. We had been married for 41 years. We had built a life together in this house on the edge of Guelph, a 2-story brick house on a half-acre lot that Kenneth had bought in 1987 for a price that sounds almost comical now. He had been an electrician, careful with money, proud of what we'd managed to save. We had 2 children. Our son Kevin lived out in Vancouver with his wife. They called at Christmas and sometimes at Thanksgiving. Our daughter lived 20 minutes from us, which had felt like a blessing when Kenneth was sick. She had been there every day near the end. She had held his hand when I couldn't hold it anymore. After Kenneth died, she became my anchor. She and her husband. I'll call him my son-in-law because that is what he was, though the word feels strange in my mouth now. They were over at my house constantly in those first months. They helped me go through Kenneth's things. They helped me understand the estate. The estate was not complicated. Kenneth had a will. The house was paid off. There was a savings account at TD Bank with just under $240,000 in it, accumulated over decades of Kenneth's careful, steady work. There was also a TFSA I hadn't known much about, which our financial advisor said held another $63,000. Kenneth had never been a man who talked much about money. He handled it quietly, the way he handled most things. The will named me as sole beneficiary. Simple, straightforward, or so I believed. In the months after Kenneth died, my son-in-law began spending more time at my house. He would come over in the evenings, sometimes without my daughter, and we would sit at the kitchen table and he would ask me questions about the house, about the accounts, about whether I'd thought about my own will, about what I planned to do with the money long term. He was a financial planner by profession, which seemed at first like a stroke of luck. He suggested I consider consolidating my accounts through his firm. He brought me paperwork. He said the interest rates were better, the management fees lower, that it made sense given my age and situation. I signed some things. I won't pretend I read all of them carefully. I was 67 and grieving, and he was my daughter's husband, and I trusted him the way you trust family. The way you trust family when you haven't yet learned what trust can cost you. My daughter never seemed to know exactly what paperwork he was bringing over. When I mentioned it to her once, she changed the subject quickly, and I told myself I was imagining things, that she was just busy, that everything was fine. That was 6 months before the woman at Tim Hortons placed an envelope on my table and walked away. I sat back down. I looked at the envelope for a long time. My bagel was untouched. Outside, the students kept walking, heads bent into the wind, carrying on with their ordinary lives. I opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, and behind it what appeared to be photocopies, 3 or 4 pages of financial documents, account statements. My name was on them. Kenneth's name was on them. And there was a third name I didn't recognize on a transfer authorization form, a company name, something with capital in it that I had never heard of. The handwritten note was short. It said, "You did not authorize these transfers. Check your TD account and your TFSA before Friday. You still have time to stop it. There is a lawyer named Helen Park at a firm on Wyndham Street. Call her. Tell her Margaret O'Say sent you." I read it twice. Then I read it again. The name Margaret O'Say meant nothing to me. The documents meant everything. I drove home in a daze. I sat at my kitchen table and I called TD Bank. I was on hold for 11 minutes, long enough for my hands to go cold even though the heat was on. When the representative came on the line, I asked her to walk me through recent activity on my savings account. There had been a transfer of $30,000 6 weeks before, another of $22,000 2 weeks after that, both marked as authorized, both going to an account I didn't recognize. I told her I had not authorized those transfers. There was a pause on the line. She said she would need to flag the account and connect me with their fraud department. I sat in that kitchen after I hung up, and I did not move for a very long time. The refrigerator hummed. The furnace clicked on. Outside the window, the backyard looked exactly as it always had. The old maple tree Kenneth had planted the year our son was born, bare now against the November sky. I thought about my son-in-law's careful questions, his easy smile when I handed things back to him signed, the way he had always refilled my tea before I asked. I called Helen Park's office the next morning. Her assistant answered, and I said a woman named Margaret O'Say had sent me. There was a brief silence, and then she said, "Can you come in Thursday at 2?" I said yes. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed Kenneth and I'd shared for 38 years, and I stared at the ceiling and I tried to understand how I'd gotten here, how I'd been so careful about some things and so catastrophically blind about others. You think grief protects you somehow. You think that people who love you would not, could not choose that particular moment to take from you. You think wrong. Thursday came gray and cold, which seemed appropriate. Helen Park's office was on Wyndham, a small firm, not flashy. She was a woman around 50, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a way of listening that made you feel she was taking actual notes in her head. I brought everything I had: the envelope, the photocopy documents, the numbers TD's fraud department had given me when I called back the day before. Helen spread them out on her desk without touching them, just looking, and then she looked up at me. "How much of this did you read before you signed?" she asked. "Not enough," I said. She nodded like she had expected that. "All right, tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. What she explained to me, slowly and carefully, was this. The authorization forms I had signed had contained language that granted my son-in-law's firm discretionary management rights over my accounts. It was buried in the fine print, the kind that requires a lawyer to decode it. The transfers had been made under that authority. Legally, technically, they had been processed as authorized because I had, unknowingly, authorized them. "Can we get it back?" I asked. "Yes," she said. But you need to move quickly and you need to file a formal complaint with FSRA, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, as well as with IRO. And you need to contact TD today to freeze any further movement. Who is Margaret O.C.? I asked. Helen paused. She is a former client of your son-in-law's firm, she said carefully. She came to me about 8 months ago with a very similar situation. It didn't end well for her. The money was already gone by the time she found out. She's been watching for others. She must have recognized something. I thought of the woman in the charcoal coat, the way she had placed that envelope on my table without drama, without asking anything of me, how she had just walked away. I drove home and I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before I went inside. My daughter's car was at the curb. She was in my kitchen when I came through the door, making tea like she owned the place, which she had always done and which I had always loved. She turned and smiled and said, "Hi, Mum. I thought I'd check in." I sat down at the table. I did not smile back. I said, "I need to talk to you about your husband." The smile left her face. Not immediately. It faded, the way light fades in October, gradually, and then all at once. "What about him?" she said. "How long have you known?" I asked. She put down the mug she was holding. Her hands, I noticed, were shaking slightly. She sat down across from me and looked at the table and said nothing for what felt like a full minute. "I didn't know all of it," she said finally. "I swear to you, Mum, I didn't know how much. But you knew something." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet. "He told me it was restructuring," she said, "that he was helping you get a better return. I asked once, and he got angry, and I let it go. I let it go because it was easier." I looked at my daughter. This woman I had held in the delivery room, who had learned to read at my kitchen table, who had been there every single day when her father was dying. "You let it go," I said. She wiped her face. "I'm sorry, Mum." We sat there in that kitchen in the silence that falls after something breaks. I did not throw her out that day. I want to be clear about that. I told her what I had found, what I had done, where things stood. I told her the lawyer was involved and that the regulatory complaint had been filed and that TD had frozen the account. I told her that whatever happened next was not up to me to manage for her. She left looking smaller than I had ever seen her. At the door, she turned and started to say something, and I shook my head and she left. What came next took 4 months. The Financial Services Regulatory Authority launched an investigation. IURC, the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, did the same. TD's fraud team cooperated fully. Helen Park was, it turned out, exactly the right lawyer. She was patient and precise, and she had done this before. The transfers totaled $68,000. Some of it had moved through the shell company quickly, but not all of it. $31,000 was still traceable, still recoverable. My son-in-law's license was suspended pending investigation. His firm placed him on administrative leave. 3 weeks after that, he resigned. He and my daughter separated in February. I did not ask her to leave him, and I did not ask her to stay. That was her life to figure out. What I got back was $31,000, not 68. The rest was gone, moved through accounts that took forms and legal processes and time to untangle, and time had run out before the full amount could be recovered. Helen was honest with me about that from the beginning. She never promised me something she couldn't deliver. The criminal charges, and they were criminal charges, fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, were still working their way through the courts when I decided to stop waiting for them to define how I felt. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in March, 4 months after all of this began. I went back to that Tim Hortons on Stone Road. I ordered the same thing, a medium double-double and a plain bagel. I sat at the same table by the window. I'd spent weeks trying to find Margaret O.C. Helen couldn't give me her contact information for professional reasons, and there was no listing I could find easily. I had nearly given up. But I wrote a card. I addressed it to Helen Park's office, with a note asking her to pass it along if she was able. I don't know if she did. What I wrote in that card was simple. I said, "I don't know what made you stop at my table that day. I don't know how you recognized something I couldn't see myself. But because of what you did, I still have this house. I still have 4 months of ordinary Tuesday mornings. I want you to know that it mattered." I don't know if she ever read it. I think about her sometimes, the woman in the charcoal coat walking away around the corner without looking back. Not asking for anything, not needing me to understand in the moment, just doing the quiet thing and leaving the rest to me. Kenneth would have liked her. I think he would have liked, too, that I didn't fall apart, that I sat in that lawyer's office with my documents in order and my voice steady and answered every question they asked me, that when the financial advisor at TD asked if I'd like to go through what to look for in the future, I said yes, and I took notes, and I read every single word before I signed anything. I am 67 years old. I am still in this house on the edge of Guelph. The maple tree in the backyard survived another winter. The furnace still clicks on in the morning. And I learned, late and at a cost I'm still calculating, that trust is not the same as love. That you can love someone completely and still need to see what they put in front of you. Kenneth knew that. He was a careful man. I just forgot, for a while, to be a careful woman. I haven't forgotten since. There's something I keep coming back to, even now. Margaret Osey lost her money, all of it. And instead of closing herself off, she put on a wool coat and started watching for people who looked the way she must have looked, trusting, distracted, still soft from grief. She didn't know me. She owed me nothing. She walked away without even waiting for a thank you. That is what I would call a decent person, not a saint, not someone chasing a reward or recognition, just a person who decided that what happened to her shouldn't happen to someone else if she could help it. I think about the kind of character it takes to do that quietly, and I realize it's rarer than it should be. My son-in-law was not a bad man in every way. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier to make him a villain and leave it there. He was charming and organized, and he remembered my birthday every year without being reminded. But somewhere along the way, he decided that his comfort mattered more than my security, and he used the thing I gave him most freely, my trust, to take from me while I was still learning how to live without Kenneth. That is a choice, and choices like that have consequences that reach further than people expect when they're making them. His license is gone, his marriage is gone. Whatever he thought he was building, he built it on something that couldn't hold. I spent a long time feeling foolish. That is the part nobody tells you about. Not the anger, which is clean and moves quickly, but the shame of having signed things you didn't read, of having let grief make you careless. I had to sit with that. I had to look at it clearly and say, yes, I made it easier for him. And then I had to decide that knowing that was useful, not just painful. That decision, to learn rather than just hurt, is what I'm most proud of, looking back. I went to that lawyer's office not knowing what I was walking into. I answered every question. I took notes when the TD advisor explained what to look for. I read the documents Helen put in front of me word by word before I signed a single one. That is not a small thing when you are 67 and exhausted and still not entirely sure how to cook dinner for one. It took something to keep going when everything in me wanted to simply close the curtains and be done with it. Kenneth was a careful man. He checked things. He read the fine print. He trusted slowly. I loved that about him, and I took it for granted that some of his carefulness had rubbed off on me. It hadn't. Not enough. But it's mine now. I earned it the hard way, and I am not giving it back. What I want anyone to take from this, if you're listening and something in this story feels familiar, is just this. Grief is not an excuse others should be allowed to use against you, but it can become one if you're not careful. The people who want to take from you will almost always come in a form that feels safe. A familiar face, a helpful offer, A stack of paperwork on your own kitchen table. Read it, all of it. Ask questions even when it feels rude. And if something doesn't sit right, trust that feeling the way you'd trust an old friend, because sometimes it's the only one looking out for you.